Morning. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. We'll wait just a couple more minutes as people are getting in, and then we will get started. Paul, I got your email, so I know that you're having some issues with electricity and all that fun stuff. So if you disappear, I will just assume that that's what's happening. All right, as you are coming in, let's get our cameras on, please, so that I can officially mark you as present. So turn your cameras on so I can see you. And then I know that you are here. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Wonderful. Wait one more minute and then we'll get started. Thank you, guys. I'm missing a couple of people who are normally here. I'll check my email really quick and see if I heard from anybody. Okay, so a couple of things really quick. Let's do just a little bit of housekeeping. The first thing is that we are discovering that we are having some problems syncing your grades from Schoology to PowerSchool. So you may have some grades that are missing in PowerSchool. So just keep an eye on that. We are going to get them fixed today because they're due in tomorrow. But if you do have, like, for instance, if you did not do your SLA essay, you can turn that in, and that's a quick, easy way to boost your grade. If you did not, if there's anything that you missed, anything that you got a low score on, go through your assignments and let me know. Or submit them. And that will be a good way to get your grades up quickly, okay? Which I'm sure all of you are aware of, but I'm just saying it for the sake of housekeeping. The other thing is that when you email me about missing assignments or anything, it's going to be really helpful for me if you tell me what class you're in. Because that'll just get me to you faster, right? So if you're like, hey, this is Emma from, 2B, I can find you a lot faster and help you out a lot quicker, okay? So just heads up, remember to do that. That's mostly if you don't message me through Schoology. I can click through on Schoology and immediately see where your section is. But if you email me on actual email, it's a lot harder, okay? So just a heads up about that, about grades. Check to see what you're missing. Check to see what you had a low score on. Take advantage of the makeup test. Take advantage of turning in your essay, even if it's late, so you can get partial credit. Questions about any of that? No? Nobody has any questions? If you have a question, raise your hand or click the raise hand button in Zoom. So again, fill in those missing assignments, fill in anything that you, or redo anything that you got a low grade on. Email me if you need help. Come to my office hour. You know, I want to help you. I just need you to be a part of the conversation. Okay? All right. So today we are picking up, right? We just left England. So what happened at the very end? Somebody refresh our memories. What happened at the very end of the last session as far as England is concerned? You can either type it in the chat or just go ahead and come off mute. Okay, so we had a new king. We had James I, who liked Shakespeare, yes. And then what happened? So Shakespeare dies. James I dies. Charles I takes over, and then what? How do we get to France? What happens to Charles I? You don't remember? Look at your notes, guys. Saeed, I can see that you're on the phone, my dude. Yes. Thank you, Anna. He's beheaded. That's correct. So he is beheaded in the English Civil War, and his son and the majority of anybody who could in high society gets out of England and they go to France, right? Saeed, I need you to put your phone away. It's not phone time. Mr. Olivio, Saeed. All right. Okay. So that's how we get to France, right? So Charles II, he is not old, right? He's young. He's taken with the majority of the high, like upper class, and they go to France. They escape, and they get there. We're gonna do this do now later. You're gonna have to do this on your own time, okay? They get there and they are greeted by Louis the 14th, also known as the Sun King. Okay. So Louis the 14th welcomes them to France. He's like, heck yeah, come on over. We're going to have some great parties, right? And he loves a good time, Louis the 14th. He basically, he loves war because he likes to win. And this is at a point where like France is a pretty major army. Like they're a pretty that's okay, Eric. they're a pretty like big deal in Europe, right? They're winning any battle that they engage in pretty much. Louis XIV loves theater. He loves the ballet. He really loves portraits of himself. That's his big thing. He loves having paintings done of himself. And so he is basically just bankrolling all of the arts in France. So he welcomes British high society. He's excited, honestly. Like, this is going to be great. So let me show you, just to give you an idea, some portraits of Louis XIV, just so you have some idea of who we're talking about here. So here's a picture of him. We got some fancy high heels. Look at that, like that cape, right? You know, I mean, he spares no expense. He spends a lot of money on pretty much everything that he does. So that's Louis XIV. So that's who we're talking about, okay? So during this time, what occurs is that some of the stuff from ancient Greek and ancient Roman plays and the works of like Horace and Aristotle are rediscovered, and they're translated for the first time in a very, very, very long time. Okay. And this results in essentially what we call neoclassicism. What does neo translate to? New, right? Yeah, exactly. New classics. Okay. So they take these plays that have been, lost for centuries, and they retranslate them, and they are going to basically say like, wow, these, and most of the time, remember, they think it's all Roman, right? They're like, this was some of the finest works of art that have ever been done. So we're going to learn from what they did. And they essentially take what Aristotle said about like what people should do, and they make it into what you have to do. Okay. So it becomes a rule, right? With Aristotle, it was really about what people should do or what makes a play great. In France, they're going to translate it into, this is what you have to do for your play to be proper and to be good, right? So the first thing is that they're going to say, and remember this from Horace, plays should adhere to their genre. Tragedies have no comic relief, and comedies should never feature any sadness, right? That's from the Ars Poetica, where Horace established that. So now this is going to be a rule. Okay. They're also going to decide that plays must be 5 acts, and they're divided into French scenes, which is a term we still use today. Does anybody remember what a French scene is? Anybody remember? It's a very particular way of like dividing a play up. Let me grab, and I haven't packed it yet, conveniently. Check this out. Bam! Restoration Drama, an anthology. Okay. So they don't have it listed as actual like scene 1, scene 2 in this particular anthology. But what they do have is every time somebody enters and exits, you probably can't tell, it's listed. So it says like yada, 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 enter Diego. Octavio runs out. Enter Antonio. Enter Flora. Exit Diego, right? A French scene begins a new scene every time a character enters or exits the stage. So every single time somebody enters or exits, it's a new scene. So this is one page. We have exit Flora, enter Flora, exit Portia and Camilla, enter Enrique and Ernesto, exit Flora, exit Enrique, enter Camilla, Portia, and Flora, exit Camilla, Portia, and Flora, enter Ernesto, enter Camilla, Portia, Flora. 10 scenes, 10 French scenes in one page. Right? That's a French scene. So you can see it gets a little crazy, right? Does this make sense? It's their way of like categorizing that the scenes have to be, let me put this back up, based on when a character enters or exits. Do we use it today? Sometimes, right? It can be helpful as a director in getting you to like figure out what's important. But otherwise, plays would be like Act 2, Scene 157, right? If we labeled it like that sometimes. So we condense it down into like the really important entrances and exits now. But at the time, that's really what they did. Like every time somebody entered or exit, it would be a new scene. Questions about that before I move forward? I just want to make sure that it's clear. Yeah? We get it? Thumbs up? Okay, perfect, great, wonderful. So what else? You must perform on a proscenium stage. I'm not actually sure how they got this rule out of ancient Rome and ancient Greek, like writings on theater, right? Because they didn't really use a proscenium, but this is the rule that comes out. You have to stage your play on a proscenium. The scenery is behind the actors and the actors don't ever interact with it. So it's really just for looks. And we have women on stage in France. So female characters are played by females. So this, for most places, will be the end of, you know, like we talked about before, Juliet being played by like a teenage boy. That's the end of that. Now, when we get back to England, Juliet will be played by a young woman. Again, not something that the Romans and the Greeks actually did, right? Sorry, they had all male actors, but the French are also looking for this to feel more realistic, right? So women actors for the first time, professional women actors for the first time. Any questions about these rules? Makes sense, right? This is sort of where I say that, like, I think this is how the proscenium theater became not only like the most important type of stage, but also the most popular, why it's still today the most popular. Probably owe that to neoclassicism. Okay. Last thing, purification. The theater should be pure, right? We're going to get rid of any racy behavior, any language, no violence, right? Going back to the rules of ancient Greek theater, we can't show violence on stage anymore. So we've got to clean it up. This isn't going to last very long, as you can imagine, but for a little while. Clean language, no racy behavior, no violence. And we're going to establish the 3 unities as rules. Now, they believed that Aristotle had established these, right? Aristotle had basically said, like, again, like, this is a guide, like, this is a suggestion, but they're going to take it to the extreme and make it a rule. And we're going to go over the 3 unities on the next page. Okay. So purification of behavior and language and the 3 unities. So what were the 3 unities? Does anybody remember the 3 unities? Unity of blank, blank, and blank. Okay, we've got 2 of them. Time, unity of time, unity of space, and does anybody remember the 3rd one? It's probably the trickiest one to remember.
Unity of action.
Yes, Benjamin, good job. All right, you guys are doing great. Unity of time, space, and action. So what does that mean? Time to them meant that the play should take place over the course of 1 day. Right? So they wanted it to start and end on the same day. Now, if you think about some ancient Greek plays, a lot of them do follow this. A lot of them take place in 1 day. Oh, sorry. I don't know why I'm yawning all of a sudden. Place means 1 location. Again, this was pretty common because the ancient Greeks, it wasn't really easy for them to go from place to place, right? But this is going to be a big change from like most of Shakespeare, right? Shakespeare goes all over. So now we're back to 1 location. The whole play should take place in 1 location. And the action, again, big change from Shakespeare. 1 plot, no subplots. So we should follow the course of the protagonist, get rid of all that subplot garbage, they say. We don't need it. It's just taking up time. It confuses the audience. So time, space, and action. So this is going to be a rule for quite a while. Again, did Aristotle actually say like all plays had to do this? No. Did he say that most of the best plays did it? Yes. But they take it a little bit out of context and they make it an actual rule. Okay. Now, theater during this time was really a social event as much as it was entertainment. Yes, you were going to the theater to actually like be entertained and watch a play, right? But you were also going because it was a social event. There were people there you wanted to impress. It was a time to be seen, wear fashion, make business arrangements in some cases. Now, an interesting thing about France is that a lot of the theaters of this time, some of the really, really popular ones, were actually indoor tennis courts that became converted into theaters. And I'll have a picture for you of one of those in the next couple slides. Okay. But yeah, so they would convert tennis courts into theaters. Doors would open 2 hours or more before the play. And so people would sort of mill about, talk, have a drink, have a little snack, an hors d'oeuvre, right? So it was this huge event. You'd get there at like 5 o'clock. The play would start at like 7:30. You wouldn't get out until 9:30. You're there for a long time. So if you've ever heard the phrase like see and be seen, this is what that's sort of about, right? You're there to watch the play, but you're also there so that everybody sees you and is like, wow, like she's got, a beautiful new dress. She's got money. She's got the power to be invited here, right? Any questions about this? Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Great. Thank you. So we have to talk about neoclassicism. We have to talk about Moliere because he was the most important French playwright of this time. Okay. He was a comedian. So he was a playwright, right? And his theater, the Comédie Française, is actually still the national theater of France to this day. So his story is very similar to Shakespeare's in the sense that Moliere was a playwright, but he was also a very smart businessman. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it because we're going to watch a little video about it. But similar to the way that Shakespeare used his connections with the court, Moliere did a very similar thing. So he manipulates his social contacts in order to get into the king's inner circle. This also helps him get out of trouble because he's going to get in trouble a lot. A lot. He was a playwright, but not just a playwright. He was also an actor. He was a producer of plays, and he was a critic. So this is one of the first times where we see people writing about theater in order to influence people as to whether they're going to go see it or not. Okay? So this is sort of the beginning of that. Where we're actually like saying like, oh, I went to see the premiere of such and such a play and it sucked and here's why, right? He also maybe married his own daughter. I think they cover that in the video, but if they don't, I'll tell you the story after it's over. Corey, you crack me up. I like to say these things just to watch Corey react. It's true though. It was a wild time. What can I tell you? Sweet Home Alabama, Marco. All right. So I told you I was going to show you a picture of one of the tennis courts that was converted, right? Here is a picture of one, the Théâtre de Temps Molière. So this is sort of what it looks like. So you can imagine how this could have been an indoor tennis court before we added the stage and this part here, right? So you have the boxes all around the side for people to sit and watch the play if they wanted. And then you actually have people sitting on stage. So if you were really super important, you could sit on stage to watch the play so that everybody here is watching the play and they're also watching you and your reaction to the play, right? We can see the actors here who are front and center having absolutely no interaction with the scenery. What else do you notice in this picture that's a little bit like something like we've talked about before? Similar to what they had in Elizabethan England. What are some of the audience members doing? Standing. Yeah, they're standing. You know why? Anybody have a guess as to why? Cheaper, lower class. This was actually not really available to just anybody. So we don't really have any members of the lower class here. A lot of these people are actually standing for fashion reasons. So they're either sewn into pants that are super tight where they like physically can't sit down, or they have corsets on that restrict their ability to sit. Yeah. So they're standing for the sake of fashion, right? So that's sort of part of it. That's why you also have the bench seats, right? Yeah. But look at the benches. The benches are empty, right? So if you really got tired, you could no longer stand it, and you didn't have a reservation for a box seat, you could sit on these benches, right? So basically, super high class people here on the stage. Oh, let me go back. Next would be you have the ability to get a box seat, right? And then we have the people who are standing or sitting on the benches. But they're all pretty high class, right? It's not like the public theaters of Shakespeare where the groundlings paid, for the cheap seats. Everybody paid quite a bit of money to get into this theater, this type of theater. Pretty interesting, right? Okay, any questions before we watch our little video on Molière? He's one of my faves. He led a very interesting life. Okay, so as you watch the video, I want you to think about a few things. What has changed in the theater? What did the church think of the theater? And what do you think about Tartuffe? Because we're going to see a little bit of Tartuffe in the thought bubble. All right. So take a second to jot that down. So what's changed, especially from Elizabethan period? what did the church think, and then your reaction to what we see and hear about Tartuffe. Anybody need a little bit more time before we start the video? We good? Okay, I don't see anybody waving frantically, so let's go ahead and start. Again, you may want to turn off your camera. And I'm actually, it seems like it's better if I turn mine off too while I'm sharing video. So I'm going to turn mine off too. I have computer sound on. Okay. Put the link in the chat. Yeah, sure. Give me 2 seconds. It's Crash Course Theater number 21. Pause. Pause, please. It doesn't pause. It never pauses. There you go. And here we go. Oh, it would help if I had the...
Bonjour, I'm Mike Rignetta. This is Crash Course Theater, and bienvenue to our second episode set in France, French Renaissance to the Renaissancening. Today, we're going to take a closer look at theater architecture in Renaissance France, company organization, and the status of actors. And remember all of those neoclassical rules from the last time? Today, we'll meet a guy who broke a bunch of them. The hilarious, possibly incestuous, much buried comic writer Jean-Baptiste Poquelin, better known as Molière. We'll look at his most controversial play, Tartuffe, and also the play that killed him. So grab your baguette and let's go. The first French theaters weren't purpose-built for theater. Most were former tennis courts, really, really large tennis courts. But in 1548, the main producer of mystery plays, the Confrérie de la Passion, decided to build a permanent home, the Hôtel de Bourgogne. The government outlawed mystery plays that same year, though, so the Confrérie accidentally ended up owning a secular theater. It consisted of a pit or parterre below and a bunch of galleries and boxes above, the highest of them called the Paradis, because it was so close to heaven. Get it? In 1634, the Théâtre du Marais was built on the site of a former tennis court, of course. It burned down and a nicer version was built in 1644, so the Hôtel de Bourgogne had to get nicer too. At first, these theaters were built assuming medieval-style scenery, not all that fancy Italian chariot and pole stuff, but they got there eventually. The government didn't allow a theater troupe to settle permanently in Paris until 1629, so in the early years, the Confrérie rented the theater to some of the hundreds of touring companies who just happened to be passing through. The repertory then mostly consisted of medieval farces, classical adaptations, and foreign plays, plus a handful of new French pastorals and tragedies when they got lucky. In 1629, the king allowed the Troupe Royale to settle in at the Hôtel de Bourgogne, and in 1643, another company was allowed to take over the Théâtre du Marais. They were joined in 1658 by Molière's company, the Théâtre des Messieurs. Now that theaters have actors, who went to go see those actors at their theaters? Well, everyone. Though women did usually wear masks. Like London, performances took place in the afternoons. Unlike London, the snack bar sold macarons. C'est magnifique. Nobles were sometimes seated on the edge of the stage, scandalously close to the working men standing in the pit. Companies usually consisted of 8 to 12 actors, plus a couple of apprentices, and every member shared some of the proceeds. After 1607, women performed as well. The status of actors remained dicey, but in 1641, superfan Louis XIII issued a proclamation saying that actors should be really, really careful not to perform anything immoral or indecent, but as long as they avoided lewdness, we desire that their occupation, which is capable of providing innocent diversion for our people from certain blameworthy activities, shall not be held to their discredit, nor prejudice their reputation. Isn't it nice when acting isn't criminalized? I think it's nice when acting isn't criminalized. But that still doesn't change the church's habit of denying actors baptism, marriage, or Christian burial. So we've come a long way, I guess. Still plenty far to go, though. As Louis XIII's proclamation suggests, his successor Louis XIV and their chief ministers loved theater and made France the performing arts vanguard of the late Renaissance. Richelieu was such a fan that he had a theater built into his own house, the Palais Cardinal, and made sure that there was plenty of Italianate scenery to fill it. But even before Richelieu's time, the court went big for royal entries, processions, festivals, and masks called Ballet du Coeur. Remember those really expensive and elaborate masks that sort of bankrupted England and helped bring about the Civil War? Charles picked up the habit in France. Louis XIV loved masks. When Versailles was being built, he sponsored one called Pleasures of the Enchanted Island, and it lasted 3 days. Around this time, opera also came into vogue, courtesy of the composer Jean-Baptiste Lully. Other kinds of theater weren't as fancy. French comedy was mostly a mix of medieval farce and ancient sources with jokes borrowed from touring Italian commedia dell'arte players. In the 17th century, a popular homegrown troupe emerged, consisting of the actor-writers Turlupin, Gros Guillaume, and Gauthier Gargy. Obviously, these are stage names. No one names their kid Fat William or Turlupin. Gauthier played old men, Gros Guillaume played fat men, Turlupin played wily servants. They became so popular that they had to play 2 shows a day in their temporary theater, which upset the more respectable actors at the Hôtel des Bourgogne. These actors appealed to Richelieu. He went and he saw the comedians and decided they were funny. They should join the Bourgogne's troupe royale. And that went pretty well until Gros Guillaume made fun of a magistrate, and then was thrown into jail, and then died. Such is the world that Molière arrives in. Stock characters, ancient sources, and fat jokes. Molière used them all, but also created something new. Contemporary comedies tweaking the morals and manners of the French bourgeois, the very people who were his audience. Molière was born in 1622 and well-educated. When he left school, his dad gave him a position at court, the keeper of the king's carpets and upholstered furniture. Very fancy. But Molière gave it all up to become an actor. When he was 21, he ran off with the actress Madeleine Béjart, and they founded the Illustrious Theater. They toured for a couple years before going bankrupt. Molière went to prison for a day, someone paid the debt, and then the troupe went right back to touring. Molière founded a new company, picked up a couple patrons, and started writing farces that gently mocked French manners. He arrived in Paris in 1658 and impressed the king, who gave his troupe the title Troupe de Monsieur and let them share a palace theater with a commedia company. And how did Molière celebrate? He wrote Le Précieux Ridicule, a play that made fun of the Académie Française. It probably won't shock you to learn that Molière was not into the neoclassical rules. Molière spent most of his life in hot water. He wrote School for Wives, a comedy about an old man who tries to marry his young ward. And when people called it immoral, he wrote The Critique of the School for Wives, a play that mocked those objections and the people who made them. A group called the Divots objected to the naughtiness of the plays and their realism, but the king was a fan and even gave Molière a pension. And when the original Palace Theater was torn down, the king hooked Molière up with another palace theater. Scholars have divided Molière's comedies into comedies of manners, character, and farces. Molière wouldn't have understood his output this way, but some of his plays lean heavily on the stock characters we've come to know and love. Others, while still funny, have greater psychological depth and are more closely attuned to contemporary French society. Molière's comedy wasn't based on exaggeration or wild coincidence. Looking at you, Plautus. He believed that the duty of comedy was to hold a mirror up to life, a mirror that involved some extremely witty dialogue. You haven't achieved anything in comedy unless your portraits can be seen to be living types, he said. One of Molière's best loved and most scandalous plays is the 1664 comedy Tartuffe, or L'Imposture. Hold up that mirror, thought bubble. We meet Orgon, a bourgeois dad who has recently fallen under the sway of Tartuffe, a holy man. And actually, Tartuffe isn't a holy man, he's a con man. And everyone in Orgon's family realizes this, but Orgon and his mother. Orgon believes Tartuffe and decides to give him his daughter Marianne, and Marianne is not psyched. Tartuffe also convinces Orgon to disinherit and banish his son, Damis. Orgon's family tries to get him to see through Tartuffe, but they're unsuccessful. Elmire, Orgon's clever wife, convinces Orgon to hide under the table while Tartuffe tries to seduce her. Finally, Orgon realizes Tartuffe is a fraud, but Tartuffe gets hold of some incriminating letters and has Orgone kicked out of his own house and accused of treason. It seems like it's all going to end badly, but somehow Louis XIV hears about Tartuffe's duplicity and arranges to have him arrested. Rex ex machina. Orgone gets his stuff back, the family is reunited, and his daughter gets to marry someone she likes. Guess how much the Catholic Church liked Tartuffe? Not at all. A lot of religious leaders thought Moliere's attacks were about them specifically. The Archbishop of Paris wrote a letter saying he would excommunicate anyone who saw or even read the play. Pressured by the church and by family, the king supported a ban. Moliere had to revise the play, rewriting it so that it made less fun of the church, and he also changed the main character's name, but that version was banned too. He wrote a third version in 1669, and that's the one we have today. Thank you, Thought Bubble. In 1667, an anonymous letter was published, Letter on the Comedy of the Impostor, defending the comedy. It was probably written by Moliere, but we don't know for sure. The letter said that it's right to laugh at the ridiculous, and that the audience would become more moral through that laughter. The author hoped that people would see the hypocrisy, pretension, and greed that Moliere skewered and work to rid themselves of those same qualities. Basically, look in this here mirror, society. In 1673, Moliere premiered his last play, The Imaginary Invalid, about a hypochondriac who tries to marry his daughter off to a doctor. Moliere himself played Argan, the hypochondriac, but Moliere really was ill. He had tuberculosis for many years and began coughing up blood during a performance. He was carried home and died that night before he could renounce acting and be given last rites. That's right, the church denied him a Christian burial. But Louis XIV intervened and had him buried in a churchyard. Now here's the part that Yorick likes. A century later, after the Revolution, Moliere was dug up and moved to the Museum of French Monuments. 25 years after that, he was buried again in Père Lachaise, where you can visit his grave today. Rest in peace, Jean-Baptiste. After Moliere's death, there's a bunch of hassle with theaters and troupes, but several members of his troupe were absorbed into the newly formed Comédie Française, which is still going today and still performs his plays as part of the repertory. Next time, we're heading off to the New World. Oh, and guess who gets scripted theater going there? That's right, it's another nun. But until next time, curtain. Crash Course Theater is produced in association with PBS Digital Studio.
Okay, so let's go back to our questions. Okay, so let me turn my video back on too, because I'm not streaming anymore. All right, so what has changed? Those of you, let's turn on our video again. Those of you who can, please. What's changed? What's different? Or what's the same? You can also answer that question. Right? We can mock people without getting denounced now, okay? Supposedly, we don't have to deal with censorship as much from not really. Theater was less controversial. Okay. So what about the church? What's the relationship been so far pretty much between the church and the theater? They don't like it? Yeah, that's putting it mildly. What's some specific examples that we've seen, not just in this video, but throughout what we've discussed. Okay, let's be, a little bit, remember we are in class, right? But the church got upset. Now, it's not just that they thought they were being made fun of, but he says that there were a bunch of officials who specifically thought it was mocking them, right? Do we see that happen today where people believe that something is specifically targeting them, even when it might be a more general statement? Tons online. Yes. Okay. Okay. So with Tartuffe, Moliere ends up having to rewrite it 3 times, right? In order for it to be actually produced on stage. So what did you think about Tartuffe? Do you think the church had it right? I'd watch it. Yeah, it's a good play. It's a very good play. There's a few really good different versions of it. It seems pretty tame, okay, compared to what we deal with now, right? Okay, comparatively, right? So they kind of dealt with the fact that he maybe married his daughter. And I said, they don't deal with it in too much detail, but I said that I would talk about it, right? So basically, what happened was Moliere had a mistress. And let me try to remember what her name was. Anyway, he had a mistress who was an actress. And the two of them she was married, right? She was married. I don't think he wasn't. She was married, he wasn't, okay? And her name was Madeleine Béjart, right? So they are in love. She's an actress, he's a playwright, right? And eventually, sort of what happens is that Madeleine, she goes to the countryside for a while. She sort of disappears from public life, okay? And when she comes back, surprise, she has with her a much younger sister whose name was Armande. And so there are some people who speculate that Armande was not actually Madeleine's much younger sister, but in fact, her daughter with Moliere, right? And so she had gone away for a little while to sort of give birth in secret, right? Well, Moliere ends up marrying Armande. So he either married his mistress's younger sister or married his own daughter. And she was 21 years younger than he was. So that's sort of the scandal there, right? Whether or not it was his daughter, we'll never know, right? But it may have been, maybe. Or maybe she did happen to have a younger sister who was like 14 years younger than she was. Also possible, right? But okay, so what happens next? Well, Charles II and the British royalty, they hang out in France for about 18 years. Right? First of all, Charles II has to come of age because it's kind of hard to like get people to back like a baby, right? So he has to come of age. And he has to build an army and convince people to back him. But he eventually is able to, they go back to England with this army and they take back the throne from Cromwell, right? And this is what we call the Restoration, because we're restoring the rightful heir to the throne of England, okay? And obviously, because Charles II grew up in France, right? And a lot of British high society had just spent 18 years in France. They're going to bring back with them all of the stuff that they had enjoyed in France. So all of the qualities of French entertainment that they had witnessed there, they bring back with them, right? So including things like female actors. So now we're going to have women on stage in England. The purification of plays, although that doesn't last for too long. The idea of having plays take place in one time, one location with one plot, right? So they bring all that back with them. And that's why we call it the Restoration. But it has a lot in common with the Royal Theatre of France for the 18 years prior, leading up to that time. Any questions about this? Anything that we talked about in France? Unities of time, place, and action. No? Pretty clear? Okay. So just remember what I mentioned, our housekeeping, about taking a look at if there are any assignments that you're missing, if there are any assignments you didn't do well on and you want to redo them. Take a look at that. Make that your priority over the next couple of days, just to flip back through and make sure that you didn't forget something entirely. The SLA essay is a big one. There were a lot of people who didn't do the essay, so that would be, if I were you, my first priority would be to turn that in. I don't have an exit ticket for you today, so if you don't have any questions, once you're finished taking notes, that's it, and I will see you on Friday. Jermaine. Bye, Ivan. Eric, any questions? Carolyn, you there? I haven't heard from you. Yeah, Eric. Okay. Carolyn, are you there? I haven't heard or seen from you. We have some assignments that you need to make up. The essay, how do I send it? I'm sorry, I can't really understand you. Put it in the chat. What about the essay? Let me stop sharing. I should be able to, I think you can still submit it on Schoology. So let me see if it's still enabled. Yeah, you can still submit it. It'll just be late, okay? So just do it on Schoology. All right? Okay. All right. Thank you.